A dangerous mafia boss rejected every girlfriend until he met her, a poor Ugandan student they met once. Their marriage shocked the whole world. This story is based on a true story. This is part 16 of the story. Starting from part 1 is recommended.
You know that kind of quiet that comes just before the sun rises? The kind where the world itself seems to be waiting, not yet decided whether the day ahead will bring peace or trouble. That was the hour when Amina woke. The nursery lay in a gentle dimness, touched only by the soft blue light from the baby monitor and the small night lamp shaped like a cloud that hung above the crib. Beyond the tall windows, the estate still slept under darkness. If one listened very carefully, the distant breathing of Johannesburg could be heard, a car moving somewhere far away, a dog barking beyond the high walls. But inside the house, everything felt delicate, as though the moment itself was holding its breath. Amina had not come to the room for anything serious. She had only meant to check on the baby. In these past weeks, it had become something her body did without asking her. She woke before the baby cried, before the house began to stir, even before the guards outside finished their quiet patrols around the grounds. Security alerts had long been part of life in this house, but never before with the baby sleeping inside. She stood beside the crib and watched her daughter breathe. The child's small chest lifted and fell beneath a pale blanket. One tiny fist rested near her cheek. Above the crib, the mobile turned slowly, its small wooden animals spinning quietly in the still air. Amina let out a slow breath. For a moment, only for a moment, she allowed herself to rest inside that calm. Then the estate alarm gave a soft chime, not the loud screaming siren that meant danger, just the quiet alert the security system used when something unusual appeared at the gate. At once her stomach tightened. Across the room, the wall monitor flickered and came alive. Amina moved toward it without even thinking. The screen showed the camera at the west gate. A car waited outside the estate. It was not supposed to be there. Visitors always used the main entrance on the east side. Everyone understood that. Deliveries came there. Guests came there. Even the security patrols followed that rule. But this car, an old, dark sedan, rested quietly beside the wrong gate. Amina leaned a little closer to the screen. The headlights were switched off. Slowly, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He did not move toward the gate buzzer. He did not call to the guard booth. He simply stood there, watching. Amina felt her heart begin to beat faster. The man turned slowly where he stood. His eyes moved along the wall, pausing. Camera, fence, guard booth, then another camera. It was as though he were studying the place, measuring it. Amina felt a thin line of cold run down her spine. From the security radio resting on the dresser came a burst of sharp static. Then a voice spoke. West gate, unidentified vehicle. Driver exited. Another guard answered quickly. Copy, the other guard answered. Hold your position. Confirm the ID. The man outside still had not moved. Now he stood close to the fence line, his head tilted just a little, studying the walls of the estate, studying them carefully. For one brief moment, Amina's mind ran ahead of the guards. Too fast, too dark. A gun pushed through the fence, a car crashing through the gate, someone running toward the house, and the baby upstairs. Helpless. Amina forced the thought away. Behind her, the baby shifted in the crib. Then, a sharp cry. The sound cut through the quiet room like a blade. Amina turned at once. Shh! Hey, hey! She lifted the baby into her arms, rocking her without even thinking. The tiny body trembled with that newborn panic, the confusion of waking suddenly in darkness. It's all right, Amina whispered softly. But even as she soothed her daughter, her eyes remained on the screen. The guards had begun to move now. Two figures appeared on the camera, rifles resting across their chests as they walked carefully toward the gate. Their movements were steady but alert. Professional. Amina knew the way these things were done. Distance first. Observation. No rushing into confrontation. Her daughter's crying slowly softened into small hiccups. Amina rested her cheek gently against the baby's head. Warm. Alive. Then she leaned slightly toward the intercom and spoke. Thabo. A soft click answered her immediately. His voice followed. I'm here. Of course he was. These days he woke earlier than everyone else. Most likely he had already been watching the cameras. Someone is at the west gate, she said quietly. I see him. His voice remained calm, almost too calm. Stay in the nursery, he added. I will. But her eyes were already on the screen again. The guards had reached the inner perimeter now. One of them lifted a hand toward the stranger outside. A short conversation followed, the sound too distant to hear clearly. The man pointed down the road, the guard spoke into his radio. Then the stranger gave a small shrug. Casual. Too casual. He turned and walked back to his car. The engine started. The old sedan rolled slowly down the road and disappeared. Amina kept watching. The guards did not move until the car was completely gone. Only then did one of them step closer to inspect the fence line. Amina released a breath she had not even realized she was holding. The baby had settled now. Her eyes were half open, gazing sleepily up at Amina. So small, so unaware of the world already moving around her. Amina pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Not today, she whispered. From downstairs came the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Heavy but controlled. Thabo. By now, Amina knew the rhythm of his walk. A moment later, he entered the nursery. He was already dressed, dark trousers, a black shirt, the sleeves rolled neatly at his forearms. First, he looked at the baby, then at the monitor, then at Amina. Probably nothing, he said. Amina studied his face. He spoke calmly, but she noticed the tightness near his eyes. People don't get lost near this estate, she said quietly. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. No, he admitted. They don't. The baby squirmed again. Thabo stepped closer and rested one hand gently against her tiny back. His palm covered almost half her body. His touch was careful, almost reverent. But there was something else in it too, a silent promise. Amina had begun to recognize that look in him lately, the one that said he would burn the whole world down before anything happened to this child. The radio crackled again. West gate secure, vehicle gone. Copy, Thabo replied. Then he turned his attention back to Amina. I'll set up downstairs. His office, the new one. Over the past 2 weeks, he had taken the old study and changed it into something entirely different. A command center, screens everywhere, maps, encrypted phones, everything he needed to run his operations without stepping outside the estate. Okay, Amina said. He remained beside the crib for another moment, just watching the baby. Something in his face softened. Then he turned and left the room. Slowly, morning began to spread across the estate. The security lights faded as the sun climbed. Downstairs, the household staff started their quiet movements through the kitchen and halls. After feeding, the baby finally drifted back to sleep. Amina laid her gently into the crib. Then she moved into her own routine. It had become automatic now. The diaper bag, extra bottles, baby medicine, emergency documents, all of it packed, always ready. Next, she checked the camera tablet. Every gate feed, every hallway, every outside sensor. The guards changed shifts exactly the way they were meant to. Still, Amina watched longer than she needed to, because now she understood something. Someone had been studying the estate this morning, and maybe that man had meant no harm. Or maybe he had. Not long after, a delivery truck arrived at the gate downstairs. Groceries. Amina watched the camera feed as the guards inspected it. Mirrors passed under the chassis. The K9 unit made its sweep. Packages were scanned one by one. The driver looked a little irritated, but here, no one worried about irritation. At last, the truck was allowed through the gate. Safe. Normal. Except normal did not feel normal anymore. Amina walked slowly toward the staircase. Halfway down, she heard the quiet hum of electronics coming from the study. Thabo's new command center. The door was slightly open. Inside, 6 monitors glowed across the wall. Estate cameras, street cameras, encrypted communication screens, and a digital map of Johannesburg filled with small, blinking markers. Thabo stood at the desk speaking quietly into a secure phone. His voice was low, controlled, strategic. The man he had always been. When he noticed her, he ended the call. Everything all right? He asked. Yes. She hesitated before speaking again. Did the guards check the road cameras? They did. And? Nothing unusual. Amina leaned gently against the doorframe. Then why do I feel like something has just started? Thabo did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the camera feeds. Then at last, he said quietly, because it probably has. The words settled heavily in the room. Upstairs, the baby began crying again. Amina turned right away. Thabo watched as she hurried up the stairs. His eyes followed her for a moment. Then he looked back at the West Gate monitor. The road stood empty, the fence silent. One of the street cameras flickered. 2 blocks away, a car sat parked along the curb. Its engine was running, its front facing the estate, watching. By the time the camera steadied again, the car had already begun to move, driving away. The next day, the estate did not truly return to peace. It only wore the appearance of it. From the outside, anyone looking in would have said everything was normal. But Amina had already begun to notice the small things. And once a person begins to see such things, it becomes difficult to unsee them. The morning itself began quietly. The baby woke before the sun had fully climbed above the high walls of the estate. Her cry started softly, then grew stronger. The impatient voice of someone very new to the world, yet already certain she deserved to be heard. Amina lifted her gently from the crib and rested the small body against her shoulder. "Good morning," she whispered. The baby wriggled, her tiny fingers curling lightly against Amina's collarbone. Outside the nursery window, the sky was pale and clean, the kind of bright morning that could make Johannesburg appear almost harmless. Almost. From downstairs came the low murmur of voices. Security guards changing shifts, the kitchen staff preparing breakfast, radios clicking on and off. The estate had found its own rhythm now. Amina had learned it quickly. Feed the baby. Check the monitors. Listen for the radios. Trust nothing that feels too quiet. She carried the baby into the small sitting room beside the nursery and settled herself into the armchair to feed her. The television remained off, but the security tablet resting on the coffee table gave off a faint glow. Out of habit, Amina reached for it. Every camera feed appeared there. Front gate, west gate, perimeter walls, driveway. Across the screens, the guards moved in steady, practiced patterns. Professional, routine, safe, or at least pretending to be. The baby finished feeding and released a small sigh, her body relaxing against Amina. Amina leaned back in the chair. That was when her phone began to buzz. An unknown number. For a moment, she nearly ignored it. Nearly, but something about the timing made her answer. "Hello?" For a second, there was only silence. Then a man's voice spoke. Low, unfamiliar. "You should tell him the past does not stay buried." Amina straightened in the chair. "Who is this?" But the line had already gone dead. She stared at the phone in her hand. No caller ID, no trace. Only the quiet room and the soft breathing of the baby resting against her chest. The words remained in the silence. The past does not stay buried. Amina felt something cold settle deep in her stomach, not because she fully understood the meaning, but because some part of her suspected the words might be true. Her fingers tightened slowly around the phone. Downstairs, a door opened. Footsteps came closer along the hallway. Thabo. A moment later, he entered the room, already dressed for the day, and as always, his attention moved first to Amina and then to the baby. He noticed her expression immediately. "What happened?" Amina raised the phone slightly. "Someone called." At once, his posture shifted. "Who?" "I don't know." She repeated the words carefully. "He said, you should tell him the past doesn't stay buried." For a moment, Thabo remained silent. He reached out and took the phone from her hand, studying the call log for a few seconds. Then he returned it to her. "Blocked number." "You expected that?" Amina asked softly. He held her gaze. "I expected something eventually." The honesty in his voice did not comfort her. But strangely, it did not surprise her either. The baby shifted again in Amina's arms, unhappy with the tension that had filled the room. Thabo reached out and brushed one finger gently across the child's cheek. "She's fine," he murmured. The baby blinked up at him, puzzled but calm. Amina watched him carefully. He looked relaxed. But by now she understood better. That calm was not peace. It was strategy. Later that morning, they left the estate for a short trip into the city. Only a doctor's appointment for the baby. Nothing dramatic. 2 security vehicles led the convoy. One followed behind. Amina sat in the back seat with the baby carrier beside her, watching the road through the tinted window. Johannesburg passed by outside in wide streets and slow-moving traffic. Taxi vans, office workers heading toward their buildings, street vendors opening their stalls for the day. Normal life. But halfway down a long stretch of road, Amina noticed something. A gray car. It had been behind them for 3 intersections already. She leaned slightly toward the window. Still there, keeping its distance, not overtaking, not falling behind. Simply there. Amina tapped lightly on the partition. The driver glanced back. "Yes, ma'am?" "There's a car behind us." The driver did not look alarmed. Instead, he spoke quietly into his radio. Possible tail. Gray sedan. 2 cars back. The lead vehicle ahead slowed just a little. Traffic adjusted around them. The gray car remained. From the radio came one of the guards' voices. Confirming visual. Amina felt her heart begin to beat faster. The car stayed behind them for another block, then another. Then suddenly, it turned onto a side street. Gone. Just like that. The convoy continued forward. Amina leaned back against her seat. Did they lose it? She asked. The driver gave a small nod. Probably didn't want the attention. Probably. The word did not sit comfortably with her. She looked down at the baby, still sleeping peacefully through all of it, unaware of the quiet calculations unfolding around her. By the afternoon, the estate had settled again into its familiar, guarded calm. Amina was back in the nursery when one of the security radios outside suddenly burst to life. Drone spotted, northwest quadrant. Amina froze. Another voice answered immediately. Confirm visual. Small drone, hovering above outer perimeter. Within seconds, the estate shifted, gates locked, exterior cameras turned to new angles. Security lights flicked on even though it was still daylight. The baby monitor crackled softly with the sudden rush of network activity. Amina stepped toward the window, but she could not see it. But somewhere above those high walls, something small and mechanical hung in the sky. Watching. Her phone began to buzz. Thabo. I see it, he said before she could even speak. I'm in the command room. What is it? She asked. Probably surveillance. Probably? We're tracking it. Behind his voice she could hear others, guards speaking, radios crackling, the quiet urgency of people working quickly. Then the baby began crying again. Of course she did. Amina lifted her at once and began pacing slowly across the nursery floor. It's all right, she murmured gently. Down below, security vehicles were already moving across the estate grounds. On the camera tablet, the drone appeared for a brief moment, just a small, dark shape drifting across the sky. Then suddenly it darted upward and disappeared. A guard's voice came again through the radio. Drone exiting airspace. Amina released a slow breath. But the tightness in her chest did not fade, because whoever had sent that drone had already seen whatever they came to see. Later that afternoon, the guards conducted a lockdown drill. It seemed the drone incident had been enough to trigger it. One of the security captains explained it calmly to Amina in the hallway. Just procedure, ma'am. He showed her the panic button mounted near the nursery door, another near the staircase, and one more hidden inside a kitchen cabinet. All connected to the control room, the guard explained. Press any one of them and the house goes into lockdown. Amina nodded quietly. As part of the drill, she pressed the button once. The reaction was immediate. Doors locked. Security shutters slid halfway down over the windows. Radios across the estate burst alive with activity. The baby began crying loudly at the sudden noise. Amina picked her up quickly. Sorry, she whispered softly. The drill ended soon after, but the baby needed longer to calm herself. Amina rocked her gently beside the window. Outside, the estate had returned to looking peaceful again. Guards walking along the paths, trees swaying softly in the breeze, beautiful, secure, and yet somehow still fragile. Amina looked down at her daughter. Living like this would never truly feel normal. Not fully. Not when every quiet moment might be hiding something that was watching. Beyond the estate wall, a car moved slowly along the street. Amina hardly noticed it. Just another vehicle passing by. But for a brief moment it seemed to slow near the corner. Then it continued forward, disappearing into the moving traffic of the city. And even long after it was gone, Amina could not shake the feeling that somewhere beyond those estate walls, someone had been watching. Morning light slipped quietly through the tall windows of the estate, thin and pale, as though it feared stepping too boldly inside. Amina sat in the nursery chair with the baby resting against her chest, the slow, steady rhythm of feeding softening the silence in the room. Since the break of dawn, the house had carried a certain restlessness. Not loud, never loud, but humming in that careful way a place hums when people move with caution. Somewhere down the hallway, security radios murmured. Doors opened, then closed. Low voices passed through the air. The baby's tiny hands stretched against her shirt. Amina brushed her thumb gently over his small knuckles and felt the tightness in her shoulders loosen just a little. He knew nothing of the world waiting outside this room, nothing of cars trailing them on the road, of drones hovering above the estate walls, of strange messages arriving on phones. All he knew was warmth, milk, and the steady, comforting beat of his mother's heart. Amina lowered her head and kissed the soft curve of his scalp. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then the baby pulled away with a sleepy sigh, and Amina shifted him carefully onto her shoulder. As she rose to her feet, she heard the low sound of Thabo's voice drifting from the office further down the hall. She paused in the doorway. His voice was not raised. It almost never was. But there was a tightness in it that she recognized well. Yes, send them everything they requested, Thabo was saying. Amina moved quietly toward the office, gently rocking the baby. Inside the room, Thabo sat behind the large desk with his laptop up open before him. Two men in dark suits stood nearby, lawyers she had seen before, though they had never spoken. Stacks of printed papers lay across the desk like dominoes that had fallen. Financial reports, contracts, emails. Amina remained near the doorway. They're asking for 10 years of financial records, one of the lawyers said carefully. Corporate and personal. Thabo leaned back slightly in his chair. Then give them 10 years. The lawyer hesitated. This investigation could escalate. Thabo's fingers tapped slowly against the surface of the desk. They've been investigating for years, he said calmly. Now they want paperwork. His eyes shifted toward the doorway, toward Amina. The tension in his shoulders eased just a little when he saw the baby. He stood up. Send it all, he told the lawyers, and keep copies. The two men nodded and gathered the documents. As they walked out, Amina stepped into the room. What's happening? She asked softly. Thabo closed the laptop. The authorities want financial records. Amina frowned. That sounds serious. It is. He crossed the room and gently rested a hand against the baby's back. But it's paperwork, he said, not war. His calm tone should have comforted her. Instead, it made something cold settle deep in her stomach. Paperwork meant history, and history meant digging. And digging meant people asking questions that slowly crept closer and closer to their lives. The thoughts stayed with her throughout the morning. Even as she moved through the quiet routines of the house, the idea remained. Digging. By afternoon, the security team asked her to come down to the command center. The room felt colder than usual. Amina had only stepped inside it a few times before, but now the guards studied the screens with a different kind of urgency. Monitors covered the walls, street cameras, news feeds, social media alerts. Images and information moved quickly across the screens. One of the security officers glanced back when she entered. Ma'am, another screen flashed suddenly in red. Alert. Amina stepped a little closer. A web page had filled the monitor. At the top sat a bold headline, Business Empire or Criminal Network. Inside Thabo Mokoena's shadow companies, Amina felt her stomach drop. The article began scrolling on its own. Names appeared. Companies. Speculation about smuggling routes and hidden financial channels. None of it proven, yet all of it dangerous. Then another image appeared. Amina's breath caught in her throat. It was a photograph of her, taken outside the estate gate some weeks earlier. The baby rested in her arms. Another image followed, her leaving a restaurant, then another. A blurry photo taken from across the street near the pediatric clinic. Someone had been watching them for longer than she had realized. Her chest tightened. The baby had only been alive a few weeks, yet strangers were already studying his face. One of the guards spoke quietly into his radio. Media monitoring spike confirmed. Another screen showed social media posts multiplying rapidly. Comments, shares, speculation. Amina stared at the photograph of the baby. His face was not completely clear, but it was clear enough. They posted him, she whispered. The guard nodded grimly. We're requesting removals. But Amina understood that the internet did not work that way. Once something spreads, it begins to multiply. Thabo entered the room a moment later. His eyes moved across the monitors. He did not react the way Amina expected. There was no anger, no panic, only quiet focus. They've posted our faces, the baby, everywhere, Amina said, her voice tight. How is this even possible? Thabo opened his laptop. They can post whatever they want, he said calmly while typing. What they cannot do, he lifted his eyes, is touch us. His certainty settled in the room, but Amina looked back at the screen again. The world was already touching them, watching them, learning them. 2 days later, Amina sat in the back seat of the convoy vehicle outside the pediatric clinic. She adjusted the baby's blanket and glanced through the window. Parents moved in and out of the building. Strollers rolled across the pavement. Toddlers clung to tired mothers, the ordinary rhythm of life. 2 security vehicles waited nearby. Another was parked farther down the street. Even so, Amina felt exposed the moment she stepped out of the car. The baby stirred slightly as she walked into the clinic. Inside, the waiting room buzzed softly with weary parents and crying infants. The normalcy almost made her forget everything else. For a few moments, she was simply another mother. The nurse weighed the baby, checked his breathing, measured the length of his tiny feet. "He's growing perfectly," the nurse said with a warm smile. Relief loosened something deep in Amina's chest. For 20 minutes, the world became small again. Charts, gentle reassurances, quiet routine. Then she stepped back outside. A camera shutter clicked. The sound was small, but impossible to mistake. Amina froze. Across the parking lot, a man lowered his phone quickly and turned away. One of the security men moved at once. "Sir," but the man disappeared into the crowd on the street before anyone could reach him. Amina felt cold spread slowly through her stomach. Someone had been waiting, watching the entrance. Back inside the vehicle, the radio crackled to life. Possible image capture confirmed. Convoy returning to estate. The baby began to fuss softly. Amina held him closer. Even a simple doctor's visit was no longer private. That night, the house finally grew quiet. The baby slept beside her in the bassinet. Amina sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at her phone. The call came suddenly, an unknown number. She hesitated. Then she answered. "Hello?" Silence, not the normal kind. There was static, soft and thin, like someone breathing very close to the receiver. A faint breath reached her ear. "Hello?" she said again, but no voice answered her. Only the thin crackle of empty air remained. Amina's fingers tightened slowly around the phone. The same feeling she had experienced from the message 2 days earlier returned to her. Someone reaching out, yet never showing themselves. Watching. Listening. After 10 seconds, the call ended. Amina remained sitting there, completely still. Slowly, she placed the phone on the nightstand. The baby shifted gently in his sleep. She leaned down and rested a protective hand on his small chest. Even after the room had grown quiet again, her pulse continued to race. A few days later, Amina insisted on leaving the estate to buy groceries. The security team arranged the convoy with care. The mall itself looked harmless enough. Bright lights, music playing softly, people walking with shopping bags in their hands. Amina pushed the stroller slowly along the aisles. 2 security men remained within sight. Another followed a short distance behind. For a moment, everything almost felt normal, until she noticed the man. She first saw him in the reflection of a store window. Tall, wearing a plain jacket, walking several steps behind her. When she turned slightly, he pretended to examine a display. Amina moved into another aisle. Again, she saw him in the reflection of the glass, watching, always watching. He was not shopping. His eyes remained fixed on the stroller. A tightness spread through her chest. She leaned a little closer to the baby. "Stay calm," she whispered softly. One of the security men noticed the change in her face. "Ma'am, the man behind us." The guard turned quickly, but the moment he did, the man slipped away into the crowd. Gone. The guard spoke into his radio. Possible surveillance contact lost. Around them, shoppers continued as usual, laughing, talking, unaware. Ray. Amina felt as though she was the only person who could see the cracks quietly spreading through the world. That evening, back at the estate, a security drill began in the courtyard. Vehicles moved into new positions. Radios buzzed with activity. Guards hurried between checkpoints. Amina sat on the couch, feeding the baby when the alarm tone sounded briefly. The baby startled and began to cry. The drill stopped immediately. One of the guards lowered his radio and gave her an apologetic look. "Sorry, ma'am." Amina rocked the baby gently. "It's okay." His cries slowly softened as she fed him again. Outside, the security teams resumed their movements. Vehicles, weapons, protocols, all of it designed to protect the tiny life resting in her arms. And yet, the cameras still found them. The journalists still found them. The strangers moving through crowds still found them. Amina looked down at the baby's peaceful face. Then she lifted her eyes toward the window. Somewhere beyond the estate walls, people were watching, learning their routines, gathering small pieces of their lives. Thabo could build walls. He could hire guards. He could control territory. But the world outside those walls was larger than any security system. Amina felt her chest tighten with a quiet realization. They were no longer only protecting the baby from enemies. They were protecting him from exposure, from attention, from a world that had already begun circling around them. She brushed her fingers gently along his cheek. For the first time, a thought quietly formed in the back of her mind. If the world could watch them anywhere, if strangers could follow them through clinics, through shopping malls, through headlines, then perhaps protection was not enough. Perhaps safety meant something else. Perhaps safety meant disappearing. The thought stayed with her long after the house had gone quiet, and it refused to leave. Morning came quietly to the estate, yet Amina was already awake. The baby stirred beside her in the bassinet, his small hands drifting slowly through the air as though he were reaching for something inside a dream. Early sunlight slipped through the blinds, laying thin, pale lines across the nursery floor. For a moment, Amina simply watched him, his breathing, the gentle rise and fall of his small chest. She leaned forward and lifted him carefully, resting him against her shoulder. His warmth settled softly against her collarbone, familiar and comforting. The faint scent of baby lotion clung to the blanket wrapped around him. Outside the nursery door, the estate had already come to life. Footsteps moved along the hallway. A quiet voice spoke through a radio. Somewhere beyond the gates, the low hum of a vehicle engine carried through the morning air. Security never truly slept in this place. Amina settled into the chair near the window and began feeding him, her phone resting on the small table beside her. It vibrated once. A security alert. She glanced down. Media monitoring update. Article circulation increasing. Another notification appeared immediately after. Social media repost detected. Amina opened the alert. The same photograph appeared again, the one from the article. The image of her standing outside the gate with the baby in her arms. There were more comments now, more speculation. Someone had zoomed in on the baby's face. Amina felt her stomach tighten. The world had taken something that belonged only to them and pulled it into the open where everyone could see. Slowly, she closed the phone and looked down at the baby. He blinked sleepily, unaware of anything beyond this quiet room. She brushed her thumb gently across his cheek. "You don't know any of this yet," she murmured softly. "But one day he might." And that thought stayed with her long after the feeding was finished. Later that morning, when the baby had fallen asleep again, Amina sat at the small desk in the nursery with her laptop open. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. Flight schedules, visa requirements, entry rules. She scrolled quietly, listening to the faint hum of the baby monitor resting beside the keyboard. Uganda. Her family. The place her thoughts always returned to when life began to feel uncertain. She was not panicking. At least that was what she told herself. She was planning. Planning was different. She checked travel times, connections, airlines that departed late at night, routes that avoided the busiest airports. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. If she needed to leave quickly, what would she take? And what would she be leaving behind? The question lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Leaving would mean taking the baby away from Thabo, away from the father who had built this entire fortress to protect them. Was she protecting her child, or quietly preparing to run from the man trying to protect them both? Amina lowered the laptop halfway closed and released a slow breath. Planning did not mean betrayal. Planning meant having options. She stood and walked toward the wardrobe. From the back shelf, she pulled out a small travel bag. Nothing large, nothing that would attract attention, just something that could hold a few essential things. She placed it gently on the bed and began adding items one by one. A spare onesie, baby wipes, diapers, a small bottle, the baby's vaccination papers, her passport. Each item felt heavier than it should have, as though placing them inside that bag meant accepting something she had not yet found the courage to say aloud, as though every object quietly asked her the same question. Are you truly preparing to leave? She pulled the zipper halfway across the bag and slid it back onto the shelf in the wardrobe, just in case. That was all it meant. Just in case. By mid-morning, the baby had woken again. Amina held him in one arm while her phone rested against her ear. The international line clicked softly, then her mother's voice came through. Amina? Relief passed through her like warm water. Hi, Mama. Her mother's tone softened immediately. How are you? And the baby? He's good, Amina replied quickly. Healthy. She kept her voice light, Easy. But she found herself walking slowly back and forth across the nursery floor. I was thinking we might visit soon, Amina said carefully. Visit? Yes, just for a little while. There was a short silence on the line. Her mother had always understood tone better than most people. Is everything all right? She asked gently. Amina glanced toward the nursery door. No one else should know, she said quietly. I'm just checking options. Her mother did not press further. Whatever you need, she said. You come home anytime. Those words settled warmly in Amina's chest. Home. A place where no one stood outside clinics taking photographs of babies, where no one read headlines questioning their father. They spoke only for a few more minutes before ending the call. Short. Careful. Just enough. Around midday, Amina insisted on leaving the estate. Groceries, baby supplies, the simple things ordinary people bought every day. The convoy moved quietly through the city. Johannesburg moved with its usual rhythm. Traffic lights changing, street vendors calling softly to passing customers, families walking along the sidewalks. Inside the grocery store, the air carried the faint smell of coffee and fresh bread. Amina pushed the stroller slowly through the aisles. 2 security men followed at a distance. Another stood waiting near the entrance. Everything felt controlled, until the crowd thickened near the produce section. Shopping carts moved in different directions. People paused suddenly to reach for items on the shelves. For a moment, Amina looked down at the baby. He had begun to fuss, his tiny face tightening with discomfort. She leaned closer, adjusting the blanket around him. Just 1 second. Someone brushed past the stroller. Another cart nudged lightly against its side. Amina's hand tightened firmly around the handle. When she lifted her head again, the guard beside her was gone. The aisle had shifted. People now filled the space between them. Her heart jumped sharply. Amina turned slowly in a circle. Strangers everywhere. Voices, movement, shopping carts rolling past. Her fingers tightened around the stroller handle. What if someone simply took him? The thought arrived suddenly. Too suddenly. For a moment she imagined it clearly. A hand reaching down. A stranger lifting him from the stroller. The crowd closing around them before anyone even noticed what had happened. Her pulse surged sharply. Security? She said quietly. One of the guards pushed through the moving crowd a moment later. Ma'am. Relief washed over her so quickly it nearly made her dizzy. I lost sight of you, she said. Just the crowd, the guard replied. But Amina did not feel reassured. Crowds meant confusion. Confusion meant mistakes, and mistakes meant opportunity. And opportunity meant danger. Back inside the car, the baby began crying. The sharp sound filled the quiet space of the vehicle. Amina lifted him quickly and began feeding him again. His tiny fingers gripped the fabric of her shirt. She rocked him gently as the convoy pulled back onto the road. What if he became sick somewhere public? What if a hospital visit drew even more cameras? What if someone followed them again? Her mind moved through each possibility carefully. Not panic, planning. Every situation a mother could imagine, every outcome she would have to prevent. That afternoon, the estate returned to its usual rhythm. Security vehicles rotated their shifts, drivers exchanged positions, radios murmured quietly as teams completed their routine patrols. Inside the house, Amina walked slowly through the garden with the baby resting in her arms. The air carried the faint smell of cut grass and warm earth. Birds moved between the trees near the outer wall. From a distance, the place looked peaceful. Amina sat on the balcony and watched the gates below. Guards standing at their posts, vehicles entering and leaving. The system worked. She knew that much. Thabo had built it carefully, but no system was perfect. People made mistakes. And the world outside the estate had already begun watching them. Evening settled gently over the house. After his bath, the baby finally fell asleep again. Amina sat in the nursery chair, the room dim except for the soft glow of the baby monitor. She studied his sleeping face, the small curve of his mouth, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Fear was still there inside her. But something else had begun growing beside it. Resolve. She could not control everything, but she could prepare. She could plan, and if the moment came, she could act. Amina reached down and adjusted the baby's blanket. I won't let anything happen to you, she whispered. Outside the estate gates, a car stood parked along the quiet road. Its engine was off. The windows were dark. Inside the driver's seat, the faint glow of a phone screen briefly lit the outline of a figure. The person remained still, watching the gates, waiting. Inside the house, no one noticed. Not yet. But the car remained there long after the evening lights across the property flickered on. Watching. Waiting. And somewhere upstairs, in the nursery, Amina held her sleeping child, unaware that the world beyond those walls had already begun creeping closer. Night came down slowly over the estate. Inside the big house, the quiet arrived in that careful way it always did once darkness settled. Doors closed without noise. Voices dropped low, footsteps faded away down the long corridors. But the security of the place never allowed itself to sleep. Amina could feel it even there in the nursery. The soft humming hidden inside the walls, the faint electrical breathing of machines, the occasional small chirp from the baby monitor. Even through the floorboards, there was a low vibration, the kind that reminded you the house was always watching, always listening. Even here, the eyes and ears never truly rested. It was close to midnight when the baby woke. At first, it was only a restless little whimper. Then the blankets rustled softly as he shifted inside the bassinet beside the bed. Amina's eyes opened at once. Since the child came into the world, sleep no longer held her deeply. Every breath the baby took, every small movement reached her. She leaned forward, her fingers brushing gently over the soft hair on his head. "It's okay," she murmured, even before she had lifted him. His tiny face tightened as he cried again, louder this time. Amina gathered him into her arms and held him against her shoulder. His small, warm body pressed against her collarbone, steady, familiar, grounding her the way only a child can ground his mother. Slowly, she walked to the chair near the window, careful not to disturb the stillness of the room. The nursery was dim. A soft lamp glowed beside her, and the baby monitor cast its faint blue light. Shadows gathered quietly in the corners. Outside, the gardens of the estate lay silent and unmoving, as if standing guard. Beyond the walls, the world waited. Amina pushed that thought away and turned her attention back to the baby. "Hungry again, As she began feeding him, his crying faded. Quiet returned to the room, broken only by the gentle sound of him feeding and the slow creak of the rocking chair as it moved beneath her. Across the room, the bedroom door opened softly. Thabo stepped inside. He moved the way he always moved, slow, careful, deliberate. Amina noticed him immediately. She always did. His hair was still damp from the shower. In the soft light, his dark t-shirt and loose pants clung lightly to him. The tightness that often lived in his shoulders was gentler now, not gone, but softened simply by being there. "You should be sleeping," he said quietly. Amina smiled, though tiredness rested in her face. "You should be too." For a moment he stayed by the doorway, watching them. Something settled in his eyes as he looked at the child, a stillness, a kind of wonder. Sometimes, even, a shadow of fear. When the baby finished feeding, Amina lifted him slightly and patted his back. A small burp escaped. Thabo let out a quiet chuckle. "Strong lungs," he said. Amina held the baby out toward him. "Your turn." Thabo came forward without hesitation, taking the child into his arms with a gentleness that stood in quiet contradiction to every story the outside world liked to tell about him. The baby rested against his chest, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of Thabo's shirt. Thabo began moving slowly across the room, rocking the baby in his arms. Step, rock, step, rock. Amina leaned back in her chair, allowing the tiredness to settle into her body. For a moment, she did nothing but watch him, a father walking carefully through a place that was still new to him, holding his child with a kind of fierce, quiet care. He murmured something under his breath to the baby. The words were too soft for Amina to hear, but the warmth in his voice pulled gently at her heart. Outside in the world, people spoke of Thabo as a man of power, a man who commanded, a man others feared. But here, in this quiet nursery, he was only a father. The baby's tiny fingers gripped the fabric of his shirt. Thabo froze for a brief moment, just a heartbeat. His chest rose slowly, as if the full weight of responsibility had come to rest on him again. Then a faint sound broke the stillness, a quiet buzz. Thabo's phone vibrated where it rested on the dresser. The screen lit up for a moment, showing a message from the security channel. Amina felt her stomach tighten. She knew that sound very well. But Thabo did not reach for the phone right away. First, he continued rocking the baby gently, waiting until the child's breathing grew deeper and steadier. Only then did he pick up the phone. "Yes." A low voice came through the line. "Minor alert. Vehicle parked on the outer road again. Amina's pulse quickened. The same car from last night? Thabo's face did not change. Calm stayed there. He looked down briefly at the baby in his arms. Any movement, he asked. Negative. Just sitting. Thabo nodded once. Keep watching. No action unless it escalates. Yes, boss. The line went dead. Thabo slipped the phone back onto the dresser and resumed the slow rhythm of walking across the room. Step, rock, step, rock. Now Amina watched him more carefully. Even while he focused on the baby, something in his eyes had sharpened. Alert, measuring, always watching, always calculating, even here, even now. You never really stop thinking about it, do you? She said softly. Thabo glanced toward her. About what? The danger. For a moment he did not answer. His eyes dropped to the baby. I try not to bring it into this room, he said at last. But you still think about it, Amina replied gently. He nodded once. Every minute. There was no drama in his voice, no pride, only the quiet truth. Amina looked at the peaceful face of their son resting against Thabo's chest. I never knew I could feel this scared, she admitted quietly, even inside our own home. Thabo stopped his pacing and leaned lightly against the wall, still holding the baby. I'm always watching, he said, even when you don't see it. Amina studied him carefully. I know. I just want him safe. The honesty of those words settled between them like something heavy that had finally been set down. There was no command in his voice, no reputation speaking, only a father speaking plainly. Inside Amina, something shifted. For weeks, she had tested him, questioned him, watched him with careful eyes. Now everything seemed to come together in that moment. He was afraid too. He simply carried it more quietly, and somehow that made her trust him more. The baby stirred slightly and let out a small sleepy sigh. Stubborn already, Thabo murmured with a faint smile. Amina laughed softly. He gets that from you. Impossible. You are the most stubborn man I know. And you are not? He asked. Maybe just a little, Amina replied. They shared a quiet smile then, the kind of smile that belongs only to two people who have walked through many things together. Thabo bent down and placed the baby carefully back into the bassinet. He did it with great care, the way a man handles something precious that he refuses to drop. His hand remained hovering for a moment above the baby's small chest, watching the rise and fall of each breath. Only after he was satisfied did he step back. Amina moved closer and leaned gently against his shoulder. Together they stood there, watching their son. The soft light from the lamp and the faint glow of the baby monitor touched the baby's face, showing the small curve of his mouth and the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he slept. So, Amina said quietly, what kind of parents do you think we will become? Thabo thought about it for a moment. Protective? He said at last. That one is clear, maybe even too protective. Amina gave a small nod. That may not be such a bad thing. Then she looked at him. And you? What do you want for him? She looked back toward the baby as she spoke. I want him to grow up knowing he is loved, she said softly. I want him to feel safe with us. I want him to believe the world is not something he must always fear. Thabo's eyes returned to the sleeping child. I will do everything I can, he said quietly, to make that true. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, a faint sound rose, the engine of a car starting, then stopping again. Amina did not hear it, but Thabo did. His eyes moved quickly to the window for a brief moment, sharp and alert, before settling again on the bassinet. Amina slipped her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers at once, warm, steady, reassuring. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. There was only the three of them. The baby slept peacefully between them. The nursery glowed with soft light, the baby monitor hummed quietly, and somewhere beyond the high walls of the estate the silent watch continued. But here, for now, there was only love, only trust, only these fragile moments shared quietly in the shadows. The morning sun spread across the estate with a calm that could easily fool a person. Inside the house, Amina moved quietly through the nursery. She checked the baby's blankets, then glanced at the small monitor beside the bassinet. The child was sleeping peacefully, his small breaths rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She reached out and pressed her finger gently into his tiny hand, feeling that soft but certain life beating there. Yet, even in that quiet moment, she could sense it, the tension that Thabo carried with him. She had been watching him since the sun rose, walking the long halls of the house, checking screens, speaking in low voices into his phone, giving instructions that were calm but firm. Every movement of his was careful, measured, almost as if he was holding something back. Before long, a feeling of unease began growing inside her, even before she could name the reason for it. By the middle of the morning, Thabo had settled in his office. The room was alive with the quiet work of machines. Monitors glowed across the walls, radios from the estate security teams crackled softly, and beneath it all the computers gave off a low humming sound. Amina stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He scanned messages coming through his system, his jaw set tight. His eyes moved quickly from one screen to another, taking in every detail. Then a notification flashed. Thabo's eyes narrowed slightly. A trusted contact, someone he had depended on for a long time, had leaked information about the baby's birth. Amina felt her stomach tighten as she watched his face. This was not just some careless mistake at work. This was personal, and it was dangerous. His phone buzzed again. This time the message came from a rival group, probing, testing the waters. Their tone was short, almost mocking. "You have softened," the message suggested. "Your empire is not as strong as you believe." Thabo did not raise his voice. There were no dramatic reactions, but Amina saw the small movement in his jaw as the muscles tightened. His fingers hovered above the keyboard while he considered his response, measuring every decision carefully. Every choice now stood between family, legacy, and power. Then the voice of one of his trusted lieutenants came through the intercom, breaking the silence. "Boss, there's chatter. One of the old factions is no longer waiting. They are planning something." Thabo released a slow breath. "Details," he said quietly. "I want every vehicle tracked, every movement accounted for. No surprises." "Yes, boss." There was a brief pause before the man spoke again. "There will be some, unless you move first." Thabo's voice dropped to a whisper as his eyes drifted to the nursery camera feed. On the screen, the baby was sleeping peacefully. "Not yet," he said softly. "Family comes first." Amina felt something tighten in her chest. She had never seen him quite like this before, standing between two worlds. One was the life of power and legacy that had shaped him. The other was the quiet life he now wanted for his family. As the afternoon arrived, the pressure only grew heavier. Legal troubles began appearing one after another, company accounts suddenly frozen, a former partner threatening to reveal old dealings from the past. Amina's heart beat faster as she watched Thabo move from call to call, from screen to screen, answering messages and issuing orders like a man conducting a storm. And yet, she began to notice small cracks, not in his ability, but in the calm mask he usually carried. He paused longer before answering messages. He weighed his words more carefully. Sometimes he let the phone ring for several seconds before finally picking it up. The lieutenant came back again with more news. A smuggling operation connected to Thabo's father had started moving once more. Some of the captains were already speaking loudly about it, pushing for action without delay. "We must strike now," one of them insisted. Thabo's hands stopped above the keyboard. His eyes moved slowly toward the nursery camera feed. Then they returned to the glowing screens in front of him. Amina could almost see the struggle taking place inside him, though no word was spoken. Protect the family. Protect the legacy. Strike back or hold back. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Just then, a small vibration touched the office window. It was so slight, but it made Amina flinch. Outside, along the outer road of the estate, a black SUV had slowed to a stop. Its lights were off, the engine running low and heavy. Her pulse quickened. The vehicle disappeared as quickly as it had come, but the message it left behind was clear. The danger outside had not gone anywhere. Even so, Thabo chose restraint. He chose them. Amina stepped a little closer to him, though he did not notice. Standing there, she could feel the weight resting on his shoulders. The lives of men who followed him, the balance of power between rivals, the long shadows of old alliances, and still he was choosing his family over immediate revenge. Evening slowly arrived. Beyond the estate walls, traffic could be heard moving along the distant streets. Lights flickered to life one after another as the sun sank behind the city skyline. Thabo leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. His hands were steady again, but his eyes carried the tiredness of a man who had spent the whole day making decisions that could change many lives. At last, He looked over the monitors one final time. Then his gaze rested on the nursery feed. On the screen, the baby slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers that moved quietly just beyond the walls. Amina entered the office quietly and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "You have been tense all day." "Again," she said softly. He did not turn right away. "They want me to fight the way I used to," he said in a low voice. His eyes stayed on the screen. "I cannot do that. Not with him here." Amina nodded slowly. She understood. "Then you are already making the right choice." Thabo let out a slow breath and finally turned his eyes toward her. "Every move I make now risks more than power," he said quietly. "It risks the only thing I cannot replace." Amina smiled faintly as she leaned a little closer to him. "Then you are wise enough to hold your hand." Together, they watched the baby sleeping on the monitor. For a brief moment, the noise of the outside world seemed to fade away, but the tension did not disappear completely. It remained there like a shadow standing just beyond the light. Every message, every alert, every strange vehicle passing near the estate reminded Amina of the truth. The world outside was still dangerous, but Thabo had already made his choice: family before empire, restraint before retaliation. And in that choice, Amina did not see weakness. She saw a quiet strength. Later that night, they stood together on the balcony. Amina placed her hand lightly into his. Below them, the city lights blinked faintly in the distance. Security vehicles moved slowly along their patrol routes, and radios murmured low reports in the night air. Inside the house, their son slept peacefully, his small breaths rising and falling. Outside the estate, the empire trembled. Old factions shifted, threats continued circling in the dark. But here, for now, in that quiet moment of shared watchfulness, there was only determination, only the fragile and precious clarity of family. And both of them understood something clearly. Tomorrow, the world would ask even more from them, and tomorrow, they would face it together. Morning arrived with the same quiet rhythm the estate had come to know ever since the baby entered their lives. Amina woke before the sun had fully climbed over the high walls. The nursery was filled with the gentle light of early morning, pale gold slipping through the blinds and stretching itself across the floor. In the bassinet beside her bed, the baby stirred. His small arms lifted into the air, stretching as though he was greeting the new day. Amina leaned over and gathered him gently into her arms. His warmth settled against her chest at once. "Good morning," she whispered softly. The baby answered with a small sound, something between a yawn and a quiet complaint. Amina smiled. Outside the nursery door, footsteps passed along the hallway. Security radios murmured in low voices. Somewhere deeper inside the house, a door closed with care. This estate never truly slept. Amina carried the baby to the window and rocked him slowly while looking out over the garden below. Guards were changing positions near the outer gates. One of the patrol vehicles rolled steadily along the driveway. Everything appeared calm. But Amina had now lived here long enough to understand something important. In this house, calm rarely meant peace. Most times, it only meant the storm had not yet arrived. Further down the hallway, Thabo's office was already busy. As Amina walked toward the kitchen, she passed the doorway and stopped without even planning to. The baby rested against her shoulder while she looked inside the room. Several of Thabo's lieutenants were seated around the long table. Behind them, the wall was covered with maps of Johannesburg, lines marking territories, routes used for smuggling, channels showing how money moved. Laptop screens glowed softly with spreadsheets and encrypted messages. The air inside that room felt heavy with numbers, risk, and the quiet hunger of ambition. Thabo stood at the head of the table with one hand resting on the back of a chair. In front of him lay a printed document, a list. From the doorway, Amina could not read every line, but she recognized enough words to understand what the paper contained. Shipping routes, shell companies, territory agreements, illegal operations, years of power and control gathered together into just a few sheets of paper. The men in the room watched him closely. One of them leaned forward slightly. "So," he said, "what is the expansion plan?" Thabo did not answer immediately. He picked up the list and allowed his eyes to move slowly down the page. Then he placed it back on the table. "We are shutting these down." For a moment, nobody spoke. The entire room went still. One of the captains let out a quiet laugh under his breath. "You must be joking." Thabo did not smile. "We are closing the routes," he said again. "All of them." A long silence stretched across the table. Another lieutenant leaned back slowly in his chair. "If we close those routes," he said carefully, "our rivals will take them before morning comes." Thabo gave a small nod. "I know." The man frowned deeply. "You built this empire?" he said. "Now you want to walk away from it?" Another captain spoke next, his voice lower but sharper. "If those routes disappear, people will begin asking questions. Men will wonder whether you are still the same man who built all this." The meaning of his words hung heavily in the air. Authority being tested, power being weighed. Thabo's voice stayed calm. "I am not walking away." He looked slowly at each man seated around the table. "I am changing the way we survive." But the men did not believe him. Amina could see it clearly on their faces. Suspicion, disbelief, fear, and something else as well. The quiet calculation of men wondering if their leader had changed too much. Just then, the baby shifted against Amina's shoulder and gave a small cry. Inside the office, every head turned toward the doorway. For a brief moment, those hardened men who controlled entire territories, stared awkwardly at the tiny child resting in Amina's arms. Amina suddenly felt exposed standing there, but when Thabo saw them, his eyes softened. For a brief second, the tension inside the room loosened. Still, he did not explain himself. Later that afternoon, the city outside moved with its usual rhythm. Traffic filled the busy streets of Santon. The tall glass towers caught the sunlight and threw it back into the sky. People hurried between office buildings, carrying briefcases and phones, each one chasing the work of the day. Inside one of those towers, Thabo sat across from a lawyer at a polished conference table. The room carried the faint smell of leather and paper. Amina had insisted on coming with him. The baby slept quietly in a small carrier beside her chair, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The lawyer pushed a document slowly across the table. At the top of the page were the words, "Family Trust Agreement." "You are transferring almost everything," the lawyer said carefully. "Properties, accounts, investments, assets that had taken many years to build." Amina noticed her name appearing in several sections. The baby's name appeared there too. A small flicker of confusion passed through her as she looked over the pages. Some of the assets listed there were enormous. Companies, large pieces of real estate, entire streams of income. Thabo studied the document quietly for a moment. Then he picked up the pen and signed. The pen moved slowly across the paper, but there was no hesitation. Ink sealing decisions that had taken him years of work to build. The lawyer watched him closely. "Are you expecting trouble?" he asked in a low voice. Thabo paused before answering. His eyes moved briefly toward the baby, still sleeping peacefully. "I'm preparing for it." Amina felt a cold feeling move through her chest. Preparing. That word carried a heavy meaning. It sounded less like simple caution and more like a man bracing himself for something that was coming. When they returned to the estate, Thabo called the head of security into his office. Amina sat quietly on the couch nearby, bouncing the baby gently on her knee while pretending she was not listening. "New protocol," Thabo said. The chief nodded. "Amina gets the top team." He gestured toward the baby. "Medical escort protocols for him. Any clinic visit, any travel, full coverage." The chief began writing quickly. "And the estate?" he asked. "Upgrade the perimeter monitoring. More cameras, more patrols, more checkpoints." The chief nodded again. Then Thabo added in a quieter voice, "Reassign 2 of my men to Amina's detail." The chief hesitated slightly. "That will reduce your personal security." "I know." Amina looked up at once. The room suddenly felt smaller. Her eyes moved between the 2 men. Thabo did not look at her while he continued giving instructions. But she understood exactly what had just happened. Those 2 guards had always stayed close to him, always within reach. Now they would stay close to her, close to the baby, which meant something else just as clearly. He had taken protection away from himself and given it to them. Amina felt a tight knot form in her chest. Before the sun had completely set, another meeting began. More captains had arrived this time. The atmosphere in the office felt tense from the very beginning. Arguments started almost immediately. "If we shut down these deals," one man said, "we lose half our revenue." Another man added, "That route alone pays for half this estate." "The streets will say we are weak," someone else argued. "Rivals are already circling." Thabo listened quietly. He did not interrupt. Then one of the lieutenants hurried into the room and leaned close, whispering something into his ear. A rival group had attacked one of their old shipping routes. The men around the table erupted at once. "Retaliate! Tonight! Send them a message!" Thabo lifted one hand. Slowly, the room grew quiet. No retaliation. The words dropped into the room like a heavy stone falling into water. Shock spread across several faces in the room. "That is weakness," one captain said sharply. "That is survival," Thabo answered. Just then, the cry of a baby carried down the hallway. The office door opened. Amina stepped inside, the baby resting against her shoulder. "I am sorry," she said softly. "He would not settle." The room became quiet at once. Men who had been speaking about violence only seconds before suddenly seemed unsure of where to place their eyes. Thabo stood up immediately. "Give him here." He took the baby with gentle ease. Almost at once, the crying began to soften as he rocked the child in his arms. His large hands moved with careful patience. No one spoke. For a brief moment, everyone in that room understood the real reason behind the decisions he had made. It was not strategy. It was not weakness. It was something none of them had expected. A family. Later that evening, the house slowly returned to its quiet. Amina stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching as Thabo adjusted the baby's blanket. The room carried the faint smell of baby powder. Soft light from the lamp fell across the crib. Then, Amina noticed something small but important. There were fewer guards in the hallway outside. Over time, she had begun recognizing their patterns and routines. Tonight, some of them were missing. Two of the men who had always stayed close to Thabo's office were not there. Her stomach tightened as the realization settled inside her. "Thabo," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "What did you do today?" For a moment, he did not answer. Instead, he rested one hand lightly on the rail of the crib. "I made things safer for you." The answer did not feel complete, but Amina could hear the tiredness in his voice, the weight of decisions that could never fully appear on paper. She stepped a little closer to him. "You look like a man who has not slept." He gave a faint smile. "That comes with the job." "Which job?" she asked. He paused, then he lowered his gaze to their son. "Father." Something moved inside Amina's chest. It was not fear. Not exactly. It was something deeper, something heavy with understanding. She still did not know the full price of what he had done that day, but she could feel it, like a quiet storm gathering somewhere beyond the walls of the estate. Later that night, Amina stood beside the window holding the baby while he slept. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance. Johannesburg stretched far beyond the estate walls. Somewhere out there, rivals were watching. Associates were asking questions. Men who had depended on Thabo's empire were already calculating what his retreat might mean for them. Power was beginning to shift. Inside the nursery, the baby breathed softly against her shoulder, and downstairs, in the quiet office where the maps still covered the walls, Thabo sat alone studying plans for what lay ahead. Not plans for expansion, not plans for domination. Plans for survival, the kind of survival that protects a family, even if it means giving up everything else. And although Amina did not yet know how much he had sacrificed that day, across the city, the consequences of those sacrifices had already begun to move. Morning at the estate began in a quiet way. Too quiet. Amina had already learned that in this house, silence often meant that something was waiting just around the corner. She sat in the living room with the baby resting against her chest, gently rocking back and forth while the morning sunlight slipped through the tall windows. Toys were scattered across the rug. A small rattle, a soft cloth elephant, and a blanket she had already folded and unfolded 3 times without realizing it. The baby had finally fallen asleep after feeding earlier. Across the room, the security monitors glowed softly beside 2 coffee cups that were already half empty. And near the window stood Thabo, looking down at his phone. For almost a full minute, he did not move. Amina noticed things like that now. The small pauses. The silence before someone speaks. "What is it?" she asked gently. Thabo lowered the phone slowly. "Family dinner," he said. Amina waited. There was something in the way he said those words. Not casual, not ordinary. Just the 2 words sitting in the air like a heavy stone. "With your family?" she asked. "Yes." She studied his face. "Is that unusual?" He hesitated for a moment, then he nodded once. "It's formal, And somehow, when he said that word, the air in the room seemed to grow colder, because even Amina understood what it meant. This was not simply dinner. This was judgment. Later that morning, Thabo's phone rang again. Amina was in the kitchen warming milk for the baby when she heard his voice in the hallway outside his office. Low, careful. The kind of voice a person uses when every word must be chosen well. She was not trying to listen. But sound travels easily through a large house. "Good morning, Mama," Thabo said. Amina froze where she stood. His stepmother. She had met the woman only once, and only briefly. The woman had been elegant and polite, but her eyes had missed nothing. Amina could hear the woman's voice faintly through the phone speaker. Smooth, measured. "I hear interesting things about you lately." Thabo did not answer. "People are saying you have become soft." The word floated down the hallway like a quiet accusation. Amina felt her stomach tighten. The stepmother continued speaking. "Your rivals are already moving. When a lion leaves meat on the ground, the hyenas begin to gather." Still Thabo said nothing. Then the woman's voice softened, almost sounding affectionate. "You are your father's son," she said. "Do not forget your bloodline." There was a short pause. "And remember something else," she added quietly. "Your father ruled because people feared him." Another pause followed. "If they stop fearing you, they will replace you." Amina felt a cold chill move through her arms. A man who forgets his bloodline loses everything. Not long after that, the call ended. When Thabo walked back into the kitchen, Amina pretended to be busy with the baby's bottle, but she could feel the tension around him like heat in the air. "Your stepmother?" she asked. "Yes." What did she want? He gave a small, tired smile. "To remind me who I am supposed to be." That evening, they drove across the city. The baby slept quietly in the back seat that wrapped carefully inside a blanket. Amina watched Johannesburg moving past outside the window, glass towers shining in the light, busy streets filled with cars, traffic lights blinking red and green. Little by little, the buildings began to change. They grew older. The neighborhoods became quieter. At last, the car turned through a pair of tall iron gates. Behind those gates stood Thabo's family compound. It was more than just a house. It was history. Large stone walls surrounded the place. Wide verandas stretched along the front. Old trees spread their branches across the courtyard. Security guards stood watch near the entrance. Inside the house, portraits covered the hallway walls. Generations of men whose sharp eyes looked very much like Thabo's. Family leaders. Men who had built power. Men who had protected that power. As Amina walked past them, it almost felt as though their painted eyes were following her. As Amina walked beneath those portraits, she felt suddenly very small. Dinner had already begun by the time they arrived. The table was long enough to seat 15 people. Relatives sat quietly along both sides. Some of them watched her openly. Others pretended not to notice her at all. Across from them sat Thabo's brothers. The tension in the room could almost be seen in the air. At first, the conversation moved slowly. They spoke about business, about markets, about what someone called recent decisions. Then one of the brothers leaned forward. "You shut down the Durban route." It was not a question. Thabo did not deny it. "Yes." The brother shook his head, disbelief clear on his face. "That route feeds half our operations." Another brother spoke next, his tone calmer. "We heard you close 2 more this week." "Yes." The angrier brother placed his hand against the table with a sharp tap. "You're tearing apart everything Father built." Silence settled across the room. Amina could feel every pair of eyes turning now. Watching. Judging. Thabo leaned back slightly in his chair. "Father built a war," he said quietly. "And?" the brother challenged. "I'm trying to build a future." The brother laughed bitterly. "You think the world suddenly changed?" Another brother finally spoke. This one was quieter than the rest. "You must have a reason," he said carefully. It was not a challenge. It sounded more like genuine curiosity. But before Thabo could answer, the angry brother muttered something under his breath. Strange how all these changes started after the baby arrived. The words were spoken quietly, but everyone in the room heard them. Amina felt warmth rush to her face. Her hands tightened slightly around the baby's blanket. No one looked at her directly, yet every glance in that room suddenly felt heavier. Thabo did not respond to the comment, but the air in the room seemed to grow colder. Amina noticed something else then. The brothers were not standing together. Some of them were angry, some seemed uncertain, and that quiet division made the room feel even more dangerous. At the head of the table, one of the older men cleared his throat. An elder. Immediately, the conversation stopped. His voice carried an authority no one questioned. Weakness invites predators. His eyes rested on Thabo. You inherited power, he continued. You do not get to abandon it. Another elder nodded in agreement. If rivals smell hesitation, they will come. The meaning of their words was clear. Strike first. Control the streets. Maintain dominance. The old rules. The elder leaned forward slightly. What will you do when they test you? Thabo answered without hesitation. I will protect my family. The elder frowned. That was not the question. I know. The tension around the table tightened like a rope being pulled from both ends. You must take back control, the elder said, violently if it becomes necessary. Amina held her breath. Thabo shook his head once. No. The single word echoed louder than any raised voice. Several relatives exchanged shocked looks. The elder's face hardened, and in that moment, Amina understood something deeply unsettling. This was no longer just disagreement. It had begun to look like rebellion. After that moment, dinner continued, but no one truly ate. The conversation changed direction. Small comments began to float across the table. Careful. Sharp. One of the aunts glanced in Amina's direction. A child can change a man's priorities, she said. Another relative added quietly, sometimes it changes them too much. Someone else spoke about responsibility, about legacy, about distraction. No one mentioned Amina's name directly, but the meaning of their words was clear enough. Amina kept her face calm. She focused her attention on feeding the baby. But inside, the accusations landed one after another. Suddenly, she became very aware of every little movement she made, how she held the bottle, how the baby shifted in her arms, how the room went silent whenever he made the smallest sound. She felt like a visitor in a place where everyone had already decided she did not belong. Thabo noticed. Under the table, his hand rested briefly over hers, only for a moment. But the message was clear. You are not alone. Still, she could feel that even this small act made the tension worse. The room had already chosen its side. Later that night, when they returned to the estate, the baby finally fell asleep. Amina slipped quietly into the living room and opened her phone. A video call request was waiting. From Uganda. Her mother appeared first on the screen, sitting in their modest living room. The same familiar couch, the same curtains she had grown up seeing every day. Her siblings hovered behind the camera. The moment Amina saw them, her chest tightened with a sudden wave of homesickness. Amina, her mother said gently, you look tired. I'm fine, Amina replied. Her father leaned into the frame. He was always direct. We saw the news. Amina blinked. What news? Articles, he said. Rumors about criminal disputes. Her mother spoke again, her voice softer. Are you safe there? The question stayed hanging between them. Amina glanced toward the hallway where security guards passed quietly by. Yes, she said. Her father's voice grew firmer. If things become dangerous, you come home immediately. Behind him, her siblings nodded. For the first time that entire evening, Amina felt something simple and warm fill her chest. Love, worry, family who did not care about power or reputation, only about her. Later that night, messages began arriving on her phone. Grace was the first. Are you okay? I heard things are tense over there. Then Ruth wrote, this is exactly what people warned you about. Another message followed quickly. You are living inside a criminal empire, Amina. Amina stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of her wanted to argue. Part of her wanted to explain that nothing in her life was simple anymore. That Thabo was trying to change, that the baby had changed everything. But she also understood something painful. No one outside this house truly understood her life now. Not really. They saw only headlines, rumors, danger. They did not see the quiet nights. They did not see the tired father rocking his child to sleep. They did not see the man trying to change a world that had no desire to change. Close to midnight, the house finally grew still. The baby slept peacefully in the nursery. Amina sat in the rocking chair while the baby monitor glowed softly beside her. Across the room, Thabo sat quietly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Both were too tired. At last, Amina spoke softly. Does your family believe I ruined you? Thabo lifted his head. He did not pretend he did not understand the question. Some of them do, he answered honestly. Amina nodded slowly. She had expected that. The silence returned. Then Thabo spoke again, his voice quiet. They are wrong. He did not say anything more. He did not need to. For the first time that day, Amina felt some of the pressure ease slightly. Outside the nursery door, the low voices of security radios could still be heard. Inside the room, the baby slept peacefully. And between the two exhausted parents, something small but important settled quietly. Not certainty, not safety, but unity. Even while the world around them continued pulling in different directions. And for the first time, Amina wondered how long that unity could survive when every voice around them was demanding something different. Morning came quietly to the estate, the kind of quiet that followed a long night of thinking. Soft light filled the nursery as the sun rose slowly over the high outer walls. The curtains glowed pale gold, and the room smelled faintly of baby powder and clean cotton. Amina sat in the rocking chair with the baby resting in her arms. He fed slowly, half awake, his small fingers opening and closing against the fabric of her shirt. The house around them hadn't fully awakened yet. Security radios murmured faintly somewhere down the hallway. A door closed softly on the lower floor. Otherwise, silence, the kind that left too much space for thoughts. And Amina had been thinking all night. Her mind replayed the dinner at the family compound, the quiet accusations, the way the room had shifted when someone mentioned the baby, the way no one had said her name yet somehow blamed her anyway. Then her father's voice echoed in her memory. If things become dangerous, you come home immediately. Then Ruth's message. You're living inside a criminal empire. And Thabo's quiet answer in the nursery hours later. Some of them think you ruined me. Amina looked down at the baby. He had finished feeding and was staring up at her now with wide, curious eyes. So small, so completely unaware of the world surrounding him. Everyone had opinions about her life, about Thabo, about what she should do. Leave, stay, trust him, run. But something became clear to her in the quiet of the nursery. No one had actually asked what she wanted. Not her parents, not her friends, not even Thabo. Everyone was reacting to the situation. Everyone was making judgments. But the life unfolding here, this strange, complicated, fragile life, belonged to her too. And more than that now, it belonged to the small person resting in her arms. The baby suddenly squirmed and began to cry, sharp, demanding, immediate. Amina laughed softly under her breath. All right, she murmured. She stood and carried him to the changing table. The routine came naturally now. Diaper, wipes, fresh blanket. The baby kicked his legs impatiently while she worked. Such a normal moment, such an ordinary thing. And yet the thought struck her with surprising force. Every decision she made now shaped someone else's future, not just her own. That realization settled somewhere deep inside her. By the time she lifted the baby back into her arms, her mind felt clear. She knew what she needed to do. Late that morning, Amina walked down the hallway toward Thabo's office. The baby rested quietly against her shoulder, half asleep again. As she approached the door, she could already hear the low hum of electronics. The command office was active. When she stepped inside, the contrast was immediate. Screens glowed across the walls, security cameras, estate perimeter views, maps of Johannesburg marked with digital notes. 2 phones buzzed intermittently on the desk. Documents lay open beside a laptop displaying financial records. The room smelled faintly of coffee and warm electronics. Thabo sat behind the desk, leaning forward, studying one of the monitors. His eyes looked tired, more tired than usual. The moment she stepped inside, he looked up, and immediately he noticed something. Not anger, not fear, but intention. He straightened slightly in his chair. Amina? She walked slowly across the room and sat in the chair opposite him. The baby shifted softly in her arms. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said calmly, "We need to talk about what happens next." Thabo didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. Instead, he reached forward and quietly closed the laptop. Then he turned one of the phones face down. The room grew quieter. His attention was fully on her now. "I'm listening," he said. Amina took a slow breath. She wasn't angry. That surprised her. She was simply certain. "Everyone has an opinion about my life lately," she began. "My parents, your family, my friends." She shifted the baby slightly on her shoulder. "They all have advice about what I should do." Thabo watched her carefully. "But no one has asked what I want." The words settled into the room. Not accusation, just truth. Amina continued, "I've been thinking about that." The baby stirred and made a small, restless sound. She rocked him gently while speaking. I love our son, she said quietly, and everything I decide now has to protect him. Thabo nodded once. I agree. She looked directly at him. So I need to be honest about something. He didn't look away. If I stay here, if we build a life together, there are things I need. The baby's tiny hand gripped the fabric of her sleeve. Amina felt that small pressure and continued. First, she said, our child's safety has to come before everything. Thabo's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. No violence near this house, she said. No retaliation that could bring danger to the estate. She paused. And if threats ever escalate to the point where this place isn't safe anymore, we leave. This time, Thabo didn't answer immediately. His fingers tapped once against the desk. You're asking me to ignore certain threats, he said quietly. I'm asking you to protect your son first, Amina replied. The room fell silent. Thabo's gaze shifted briefly to the baby. A long moment passed. Then he nodded. That's fair, Amina continued. Second, no lies. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I don't mean you have to tell me every detail of your work, she clarified. But if danger exists, I need to know. Her voice stayed steady. I won't raise my child in a house where I'm the only person who understands the risks. Thabo studied her carefully. You deserve honesty, he said, even when it's difficult. The baby shifted again, then suddenly began crying. Loud, demanding. Amina instinctively stood and began rocking him gently. Thabo watched quietly as she calmed the baby, her movements automatic now. The crying softened slowly. The moment lasted less than a minute. But it changed the atmosphere of the conversation, because suddenly the reason for everything was right there between them. Alive, fragile, depending on both of them. Amina sat down again. Third, she said, I need to see a future beyond this world. Thabo didn't interrupt. I'm not asking you to abandon everything overnight, she continued. I know that's not realistic. Her eyes moved briefly to the monitors on the wall. But I need to know that one day we won't be living inside constant danger. Thabo leaned back slightly in his chair. His gaze shifted briefly toward the baby, then back to her. That's already the direction I'm moving, he said quietly. Amina nodded. She believed him. But she continued anyway. Fourth, she said, security can't become a prison. Thabo's expression changed slightly. I understand protection, she explained, but I still need to live a life. She hesitated before finishing. I need freedom to take my son outside the estate, to see my friends, to breathe. Thabo considered that carefully. That can be arranged, he said. Amina took one more breath. There was one last thing, the most important one. And finally, she said softly, if violence ever puts our child directly in danger, her voice remained calm, I will leave. The words hung in the room. I won't hesitate, she added quietly. I'll take him and go somewhere safe. Silence followed, not angry silence, just the weight of reality. Thabo didn't react immediately. He simply watched her for several seconds. Then he nodded once. You're asking for things I should have offered first. Amina hadn't expected that answer. He leaned forward slightly for slight. You're right about all of it. His eyes moved toward the baby again. Everything I've been doing these last weeks, closing operations, shifting security, transferring assets. He exhaled slowly. It was for exactly these reasons. Amina studied him. For the first time, she realized something important. He hadn't just been reacting to pressure. He had been preparing for this future already. The baby made a small, sleepy sound and rested his head against her shoulder. Amina looked down at him, then back at Thabo. Do you regret choosing this life? She asked quietly. Thabo didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the baby. I regret the things it might cost him, he said. The honesty in his voice felt heavier than any promise. The room fell quiet again, but the silence felt different now, clearer. Later that afternoon, Amina stood on the estate balcony holding the baby. The sun was beginning to set over the city. Johannesburg stretched out in the distance, glowing orange and gold beneath the fading light. Below the balcony, security guards moved through their patrol routes. Cars passed quietly along the distant roads. The world was still dangerous, still complicated, still uncertain. But something inside her felt steadier. Behind her, through the open balcony door, Amina could hear Thabo speaking quietly into one of his phones. Making decisions, shifting things, working inside the world he knew, but now she had drawn the lines that would shape their future. The baby stirred slightly and opened his eyes. Amina smiled down at him. The road ahead was still dangerous. But for the first time since he was born, Amina wasn't just surviving it. She was choosing it. Evening came gently upon the estate. Outside the tall walls, the sky slowly changed its color, moving from soft gold to a deep blue of night. Inside the house, everything began to follow the quiet rhythm that comes when the day is ending. Along the perimeter, the security lights clicked on one by one, and somewhere down the corridor, a radio murmured softly as guards changed their shifts. Inside the nursery, the light was warm and low. Amina stood beside the crib, carefully lowering the baby onto the mattress. For a moment, she did not move away. She kept her hand resting lightly on the small rise of the baby's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Up, down, up, down. Only when she was certain that the child had truly fallen asleep did she gently pull the blanket a little higher and step back. The room carried the soft scent of milk and baby lotion. Tiny clothes were folded neatly on the dresser. A stuffed rabbit sat slightly crooked beside the crib rails, and on the small table nearby, the baby monitor glowed with a gentle light. Simple things. Delicate things. Amina slowly lowered herself into the rocking chair. For the first time the whole day, the house had grown quiet enough that she could hear the faint ticking of the nursery clock. The baby shifted once in his sleep but did not wake. Then the silence returned again, a rare kind of silence. The kind that feels almost like a blessing. Amina leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her body still carried the deep tiredness that comes with new motherhood. Those strange nights broken into pieces of sleep, the constant listening for even the smallest cry. But tonight there was something else beneath that tiredness. A quiet steadiness. Yesterday she had drawn the lines clearly, and Thabo had listened. She was still thinking about that when the nursery door opened softly behind her. Thabo stepped inside. He moved quietly, the way a man does when he knows there's a sleeping child nearby. Amina turned her head slightly to look at him. He looked freshly bathed, his hair still a little damp, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up loosely. Yet, the tiredness in his eyes had not left him. He walked toward the crib and leaned gently over the rail. For several seconds, he said nothing. He simply watched. Amina noticed something immediately. He was not scanning the room. He was not glancing toward the hallway. He was not listening to the radios outside. His eyes were on the baby, watching the small rise and fall of the blanket, watching the tiny fist curled near the baby's cheek. After a moment, he stepped back and lowered himself onto the edge of the bed across the room. Over these past weeks, the nursery had slowly become a second living space for both of them. Amina rocked gently in the chair. "Peaceful," she murmured softly. "For now," Thabo replied quietly. Both of them looked again toward the crib. The baby made a small sleepy sound but did not wake. For a while, neither of them spoke. But the silence between them tonight did not feel heavy. It was simply careful. At last, Thabo leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I meant what I said yesterday." Amina looked at him. His voice was calm and steady. "I'm not going to let this world swallow us." He did not say it like a grand promise. It sounded more like a simple truth. Amina studied his face closely. Yesterday she had given him her conditions, her boundaries, her choices. Now she waited to see what would follow. "What does that look like?" she asked gently. Thabo breathed out slowly. "Closing the things that no longer need to stay open." His eyes moved briefly toward the hallway. "Moving money to places where no one can touch it. Making sure the problems never reach this house." The way he spoke was practical, almost cold in its precision. But when his gaze returned to the crib, something in his expression softened. "I will not raise my child inside chaos," he added. Amina felt something shift quietly inside her chest. Not quite relief, but something very close to it. She turned slightly in the rocking chair and watched the baby sleeping. The child's lips moved faintly, as if dreaming. Amina reached over and gently adjusted the corner of the blanket. Thabo stood up again and walked closer to the crib. Carefully, he reached down and placed one finger inside the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around it immediately. The reaction caught him by surprise. He froze where he stood. Amina noticed at once. "You're stuck now," she whispered softly. Thabo looked over at her. "What do you mean?" Amina allowed herself a small smile. "They do that." Thabo lowered his eyes again to the tiny hand, wrapped around his finger. For a man who had sat across from dangerous men, a man who had negotiated with people capable of violence, a man who had commanded armed crews and controlled wide networks of business and crime, at that moment he looked completely disarmed. After a few seconds, the baby released his finger and shifted in her sleep. Still, Thabo did not pull his hand away right away. He remained there a little longer. Then the baby's eyelids began to flutter, slowly, sleepily. Her tiny mouth moved. There was a small pause. Then, a smile. Not the kind that comes by accident, not the kind that appears without meaning. This was a real smile, wide, clear, and it was aimed straight at Thabo. He blinked. Then again, as though he was not quite certain his eyes had seen the truth. "Did you?" he began. Amina gave a soft laugh. "Yes." Thabo continued staring down into the crib. "She smiled." Amina nodded gently. "She did." He leaned a little closer. The baby blinked in that sleepy way children do and stretched her small arms, making a soft little sound. "You see?" Amina murmured. "She already knows who you are." Thabo shook his head slightly, still watching the child. "I've negotiated with men who could kill me without even blinking," he said quietly. "But this tiny person, she terrifies me." Amina laughed again, though this time it was softer. For several minutes they remained there, simply watching their child breathe. Outside the estate, everything remained alert and guarded. But inside the nursery, something much gentler lived. Later that night, the baby had fallen asleep again. The lights in the nursery were low. On the nightstand in the bedroom, the baby monitor gave off a faint glow. Amina lay on her side beneath the blankets, watching the small green screen that showed the crib. The baby slept peacefully. Across the room, Thabo sat on the edge of the bed, his phone resting face down beside him. That was unusual. Normally the phone never left his reach. But tonight he had pushed it aside. Amina noticed that as well. "You're not working," she said. "Not tonight," he answered. He leaned back against the headboard beside her. For a moment they both stayed quiet. Then Thabo spoke in a low voice. "Yesterday, I thought you might leave." Amina turned her head to look at him. "I wouldn't have blamed you," he added. The honesty hanging in the room felt delicate, but it did not break anything between them. Instead, Amina spoke gently. "I didn't expect life to look like this." This. Thabo let out a small breath that carried a hint of amusement. "Neither did I." Both of them glanced again at the monitor. The baby shifted in her sleep but did not wake. Amina slowly rolled onto her back. "What do you think she'll be like?" she asked. Thabo looked at her. "In 10 years. In 20. He thought about it for a moment. "I think she'll be stubborn," he said. Amina smiled. "That's definitely your fault. Or yours." She reached across and rested her hand gently on his arm. It was a small, simple touch. But after so many weeks filled with tension, it felt like crossing a bridge. He did not move away. Instead, he placed his hand over hers. The contact was warm, familiar, something that had been earned again. For a while they lay there quietly, listening to the soft, static hum of the baby monitor, listening to each other breathe. Then suddenly the cry came, sharp, louder than usual. Amina's eyes opened at once. On the monitor, the baby was moving restlessly in the crib. The crying grew stronger now. Amina was already out of the bed before she was fully awake. Thabo came right behind her. The two of them reached the nursery at the same moment. The baby was crying hard now. Amina quickly lifted the child into her arms. "Hey, hey," she murmured softly, trying to calm her. But immediately she felt something was not right. The baby's skin felt hot, too warm. Amina's stomach tightened with worry. "She's too warm." Thabo moved closer without delay. "How warm?" he asked. "I don't know." Amina carried the baby over to the changing table and reached for the thermometer. The baby's cries grew sharper. The small body twisted restlessly in her arms. Carefully, Amina placed the thermometer where it needed to be. The seconds began to stretch longer than they should. Then the small screen gave a beep. Amina looked down. Her heart sank. Fever. Thabo's voice became calm and firm at once. "We're calling the doctor." Even as he spoke, he had already taken out his phone. Amina began pacing slowly around the nursery, rocking the baby gently, trying to soothe the crying. Suddenly, the room felt too bright, too loud, too small. Within moments, Thabo was speaking quickly into the phone. "Yes, now." There was a short pause. "Bring the pediatric kit." Another pause followed. "And have the car ready." He ended the call and turned back to Amina. "The doctor is on the way." Amina nodded, but her chest felt tight with worry. The baby cried harder against her shoulder. "What if it's something serious?" she whispered. Thabo stepped closer to her. "It's probably not," he said. But Amina could see the worry in his eyes as well. Then they waited. For Amina, those 10 minutes felt like the longest of her life. Somewhere far beyond the estate walls, a distant siren could be heard faintly moving through the city. At last, the nursery door opened. The estate doctor entered quickly, carrying a small medical bag. Within minutes, the baby's temperature was checked again. Questions were asked. Medicine was carefully measured. The doctor examined the child gently. Then finally, he leaned back. "Minor fever," he said. "Most likely a reaction to the vaccination earlier this week." Amina felt her knees nearly give way with relief. It should pass within a few hours. The medicine was given. Slowly, the baby's cries began to soften. Within half an hour, the small body relaxed again in Amina's arms. The doctor left as quietly as he had come. The nursery lights were dimmed again. Close to dawn, the baby finally fell into a deep sleep. Amina sat in the rocking chair, completely exhausted. Thabo stood beside the crib, watching their child breathe. The early light of morning slowly crept through the curtains. Soft. Pale. Thabo leaned slightly over the crib rail. "You frightened us tonight," he murmured to the sleeping baby. His voice was quiet, almost as though he felt shy about the emotion in it. Amina watched him from the rocking chair. Something inside her softened. The fear they had felt tonight had been real, shared between them, not spoken through big words or promises. Just two parents standing in the quiet after a long night, making sure their child was still breathing. Thabo looked up at her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Outside, the estate guards were changing shifts again. Radios murmured faintly in the hallway. The world outside remained dangerous, complicated, uncertain. But inside the nursery, the light of dawn touched the crib gently. The baby slept safely. And Amina found herself thinking something she had not allowed her heart to believe before. Maybe, just maybe, this family might truly survive. Morning came quietly, the way it often does on that estate. The place always woke early. In the courtyard, the guards were already changing shifts. Somewhere near the front gate, engines were starting. And through the little security earpieces, radios murmured softly as men reported to one another. But inside the nursery, the morning carried a gentler feeling. Amina woke slowly in the rocking chair. Sometime during the night, she must have fallen asleep there without realizing it. Her neck felt stiff, her shoulders sore, and the thin blanket someone had placed over her had slipped halfway to the floor. For a moment, she stayed still. Her first instinct, just like every morning these days, was to look straight at the crib. The baby was sleeping peacefully. No restless turning, no crying, only the small, steady rise and fall of the blanket as the child breathed. Relief moved through Amina's chest again. The fever was gone. The thermometer still rested on the side table where the doctor had left it the night before. Beside it stood the small bottle of medicine, a quiet reminder of how frightening that night had been. Amina released a slow breath. Then she noticed something else. Thabo was sitting in the chair across the room. He had not gone to bed. He sat there with the baby resting in his arms, carefully, almost awkwardly, as though he still struggled to believe that something so small had truly been placed in his care. The morning light slipped through the curtains and touched the side of his face. He looked tired. Not the kind of tiredness she had seen many times before, the one that comes from late nights, long meetings, and dangerous work. This was different. This looked like the tiredness of a man who had stayed awake the whole night just watching a child breathe. The baby stirred gently against his chest. Without thinking, Thabo adjusted his hold, murmuring softly to the child in a voice so low Amina could not hear the words. Amina watched them quietly for a few moments. Then she spoke. "You didn't sleep." Thabo looked up. He had not realized she was awake. "She didn't either," he replied softly. Amina smiled a little. The baby made a small, sleepy sound and settled again. For a moment, the room remained quiet. Amina studied Thabo closely. Something about him felt focused. Not restless, not distracted, focused. He was thinking, planning. By now she had learned to recognize the difference. His phone vibrated on the small table beside him, once, then again. In the quiet nursery, the sound seemed strangely loud. Thabo glanced toward it but did not move right away. After a moment, he carefully lifted the baby and placed her back into the crib. The little one stretched once but did not wake. He checked the blanket and adjusted it gently before stepping toward the table to pick up the phone. Amina watched his face as he listened. His voice stayed low. Yes. There was a pause. I saw the schedule. Another pause followed. Investors confirmed? His expression remained steady, but Amina could feel the shift in the room. This was work. The outside world quietly pushing its way back inside again. He listened a little longer. Then he said something that made Amina straighten in her chair. No. Change the plan. There was a short silence from the other end of the call. Yes, Thabo continued calmly. They're coming with me. Amina frowned slightly. A moment later, he ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. When he turned toward her again, his expression had settled into something firm. Amina, he said. The tone of his voice made her fully alert. What is it? She asked. There's a business announcement this afternoon. She waited for him to continue. Press will be there. Investors, partners. That by itself was nothing unusual. Thabo's companies made announcements like that all the time. But the way he was looking at her told her there was more. And? She asked. Thabo held her gaze. I want you and the baby to come with me. For a moment, Amina thought she must have heard him wrong. The baby? She repeated quietly. Yes. Now Amina sat up straight in the chair. The idea immediately felt dangerous. Public appearances meant cameras. Cameras meant attention. And attention always meant risk. You want to take her to a press event? Thabo nodded once. The calm certainty on his face did not move. Amina's first feeling was simple fear. That's not safe. She did not raise her voice, but the words came out sharp all the same. People watched those events, reporters, investors, anyone could be there. Thabo walked closer to the crib and looked down at the sleeping baby. Then he spoke in a quiet voice. Hiding you makes you a target. Amina blinked slowly. He turned his eyes back to her. Standing beside you makes you untouchable. The words settled between them, little by little. Amina searched his face carefully. This was not pride speaking. This was not some dramatic show of power. This was strategy. Careful, thought through. He continued speaking. If people believe you are a secret, he said, then they believe you are leverage. His gaze moved down to the baby again. But if the whole world sees that you are my family, touching you becomes impossible. Amina felt something tighten quietly inside her chest. This was not only about protection. There was something more in it. You want the world to know, she said softly. Yes. He did not hesitate. I want them to know she exists. Amina looked down at the baby, at the tiny hand curled gently against the blanket. For many months, their life had remained quiet, hidden within these walls, protected, yes, but unseen. Now Thabo was choosing something very different. Visibility, recognition, risk. The baby shifted slightly in her sleep, her small fingers curling against the soft fabric. Amina felt that strong protective instinct rise inside her again. She looked back at Thabo. Are you sure? His answer came immediately. More sure than anything I've done. By late morning, the estate had become a place of careful movement. Everything ran like a well-organized machine. Security teams moved through the courtyard, checking the vehicles. Drivers reviewed the planned routes. Then they reviewed the backup routes as well. Another team examined the car seats and the baby carrier with a seriousness that almost seemed excessive. Amina stood in the bedroom preparing the diaper bag. Extra bottles, 2 blankets, wipes, and the small stuffed rabbit the baby liked to hold when sleeping. She checked everything once, then she checked it again. Her hands moved out of habit, but her mind did not feel calm. This would be the first time the baby left the estate. The first time strangers would lay eyes on her. The weight of that thought pressed heavily on Amina's chest. Behind her, Thabo stood near the window, looking over something on his tablet with one of his security advisors. Routes, arrival times, press entrances. Even from across the room, Amina could sense the intensity of their planning. Nothing was being left to chance. Eventually, the advisor finished and left the room. Thabo turned and looked at her. You don't have to do this if it makes you uncomfortable. Amina lifted her eyes to him. He meant those words. And that mattered, but she slowly shook her head. No, she said. Then after a short moment, she added, if we are doing this, we do it together. Thabo studied her quietly for a second. Then he nodded once. The corporate building stood tall like a sheet of glass against the afternoon sky. Amina saw it through the tinted window of the car as they approached. Outside, journalists had already gathered near the entrance. Cameras, microphones, security barriers. The moment the convoy turned into the driveway, flashes of light began popping. Even before the car had stopped moving, Amina felt her stomach tighten. The leather seat felt cool beneath her hands. She adjusted the baby slightly in the carrier strapped against her chest. The baby slept peacefully, completely unaware of all the attention gathering outside. Inside the car, everything remained quiet. Thabo sat beside her, watching the scene outside with the calm focus of a man who had lived under public scrutiny for many years. "You ready?" he asked gently. Amina let out a slow breath. "No," she admitted. Then she looked down at the baby. "But we are doing it anyway." The car came to a stop. For a brief moment there was stillness. Then the door opened. The cameras burst into flashes of light. The bright flashes began even before she stepped out. Amina blinked against the sudden brightness. Immediately, whispers began spreading through the crowd. People noticed. The woman standing beside Thabo, the baby resting in her arms. Questions began flying at once. "Mr. Mokoena, is that your child? Who is the woman with you? Is this a family announcement?" Thabo did not answer any of the questions. Instead, he simply placed a steady hand against the small of Amina's back and guided her forward into the building. The message had already been given without words. Inside, the event hall was full. Investors sat in neat rows. Business partners stood in small groups, speaking quietly. Executives carried themselves with that polished confidence that belongs to the corporate world. The moment Thabo entered the room, conversations slowed almost at once. Then people began to notice Amina and the baby. Whispers began moving through the room again. Someone stopped clapping halfway through their applause. Two executives leaned toward each other, exchanging quiet words. A phone appeared in someone's hand. Amina could feel the weight of every eye in the room turning toward her. She forced herself to breathe slowly. This was the world Thabo lived inside. Cold, observant, always calculating. When the event began, Thabo stepped onto the stage. The lights shifted to focus on him. Amina remained near the side of the room with the baby resting in her arms, listening, watching. His speech began the way most corporate announcements begin. Numbers, growth projections, strategic restructuring, all the usual language of business. But halfway through, he paused. The room grew even quieter. Then Thabo turned his gaze toward the side of the stage, toward Amina, toward the baby. And he spoke words that changed the feeling in the entire room. "Everything I am building now," he said calmly, "is for my family." Amina felt the room react instantly. Heads turned. Cameras swung toward her at once. For many months, she had existed only inside the estate walls, hidden, protected, unknown. And now an entire room filled with powerful strangers had turned to look at her, because he had chosen to reveal her. Thabo continued without any hesitation. "My priorities have changed." He reached out and rested one hand gently on Amina's shoulder. "This is why." For a brief moment, the room seemed almost stunned, but the speech moved forward. Then came the second surprise. Thabo announced changes to the structure of his business empire. Assets were being transferred into legal trusts. Several high-risk international operations would be reduced. A number of aggressive expansion projects were quietly canceled. Amina did not understand every detail being discussed, but the reactions in the room were impossible to miss. Concern, shock, calculations forming quickly behind quiet faces. A man seated in the front row leaned toward another investor, whispering urgently. Someone else frowned down at their notes. These decisions were costly, and they were risky. Later, in the private office upstairs, the atmosphere had grown tense. Thabo's advisors stood gathered around the large desk. Documents were spread across the polished surface. Amina stood near the window, gently rocking the baby while looking out at the city skyline. One of Thabo's trusted lieutenants stepped closer to him. He kept his voice low. "You realize what this looks like?" Thabo did not look up from the document he was signing. "It looks like priorities." The man shook his head slightly. "It looks like weakness." Only then did Thabo lift his eyes to meet his gaze. "No," he said calmly. "It looks like clarity." The lieutenant hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke the thought that everyone else in the room was likely thinking. "Someone will challenge you." Thabo's reply came without the slightest emotion. Let them. Across the room, Amina watched him quietly, and she realized something she had not fully understood before. Power had always been the thing protecting them, but today he had willingly given up part of that power, not because he had been forced to, because he chose to. He had not only spoken about change, he had risked his own position to prove it. That evening, the estate felt calm again. The baby slept peacefully in the crib. The nursery monitor gave off its soft glow beside the bed. Amina sat on the edge of the mattress, watching the screen. Down the hallway, she could hear the faint murmuring of security radios again, the same sounds the house always carried. But something inside the walls felt different now. A few minutes later, Thabo entered the room. He loosened his tie and set it aside. For a short while, neither of them said anything. Then Amina spoke softly. "You really meant everything you said." Thabo looked toward the glowing nursery monitor. "I meant it long before I said it." Amina studied him quietly. Today she had seen something she had not fully believed before. Not promises, not private reassurance. Real sacrifice, real change. She slowly lay back against the pillows. In the nursery, the baby shifted a little in her sleep, but did not wake. Outside, the estate lights shone across the gardens. For now, the house was peaceful. For now, the world outside remained quiet. Amina continued watching the small glowing screen beside the bed, and for the first time since this life had begun, she allowed herself to believe something she had once been afraid to hope for. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally becoming a real family. Morning came softly that day. There were no alarms ringing, no sudden cries breaking the silence, only the sunlight slipping gently through the nursery curtains, spreading across the pale wooden floor in thin lines of gold. Amina woke to the quiet rustling of the baby moving inside the crib. For a moment, she stayed still. She had learned to do that now, to pause first and listen. The house breathed in its familiar rhythm. Footsteps sounded faintly somewhere in the hallway. A radio crackled quietly through a guard's earpiece outside the room. A door closed softly further down the corridor. These were normal sounds now. Weeks ago, those same sounds would have made her tense without even knowing why. But now they simply meant the estate had awakened. Another day had begun. The baby made a small sound. Amina slowly pushed herself upright and leaned over the crib. Two dark eyes blinked up at her. Wide, curious, fully awake. "Well now," Amina murmured, her voice still carrying the warmth of sleep as she lifted the baby into her arms. "Good morning to you too." The baby stretched both arms outward, her fingers opening and closing as if she were testing the world around her. Amina settled herself into the rocking chair and began feeding her. The nursery felt warm under the morning light. The stuffed rabbit rested crookedly in the corner of the crib. A small blanket had slipped halfway down onto the floor. And the baby monitor glowed quietly on the dresser. Everything looked ordinary, simple, safe. For the first time in many weeks, Amina felt something unfamiliar settle gently inside her chest. Calm. Not a perfect calm. Not the kind that makes every worry disappear, but real enough that her shoulders slowly relaxed as the rocking chair moved gently back and forth. The baby drank quietly, now and then making those small, thoughtful sounds babies make when they are completely content. Amina brushed her fingers softly along the baby's cheek. "You frightened us quite a bit last week," she whispered. The baby blinked up at her, as if trying to make sense of the words. Outside the nursery window, a security vehicle rolled slowly along the driveway. Its engine hummed briefly before the sound faded away. The world outside was still there, still guarded, still complicated. But inside the nursery, the morning felt peaceful. And for once, Amina allowed herself to remain inside that peace. Later that morning, Amina decided to do something she had been meaning to do for several days. She carefully propped her phone against a stack of folded baby blankets on the dresser. Then she stepped back and adjusted the angle. A little to the left, then a little higher. Perfect. The baby sat in her lap, wrapped halfway in a soft yellow blanket. Amina pressed the record button. "Hello," she said gently, smiling toward the screen. "This is for your grandmother." The baby blinked at the camera, then gave a wide yawn. Amina laughed quietly. "Oh no, don't fall asleep now," she teased softly. She shifted the baby a little, so the tiny face stayed within the frame. "Look at her," she continued gently, speaking as though her mother were sitting right there listening from far away. "She's getting bigger every day. The baby answered with a small squeaking sound. Amina's smile widened. See, she's talking now. The baby kicked one foot enthusiastically against the blanket. Amina tilted the phone slightly to capture the movement. Your grandmother is going to love seeing this, she murmured. Recording these small moments felt strangely important, almost necessary. Proof. Proof that life here wasn't only tension and guarded gates. Proof that her daughter was safe. Proof that she was okay. And maybe, somewhere deep down, proof that all the fear they had lived through hadn't broken them. A little later, she made the call. The video connection flickered once before stabilizing. Then her mother's face appeared on the screen. Ah! Her mother exclaimed immediately. Let me see the baby. Amina laughed softly and angled the camera. There she is. Her mother leaned closer to the screen, her expression lighting up instantly. Oh my goodness, she's grown! Behind her, Amina could see her father leaning awkwardly into the frame, trying to look composed but clearly curious. Careful, he muttered. You're too close to the camera. Her mother ignored him completely. The baby waved one tiny arm toward the phone. Look, her mother said happily. She knows we're here. Amina felt a warm ache spread slowly through her chest. She missed them, more than she sometimes allowed herself to admit. Her mother's voice softened as she studied Amina more closely. You look tired, Amina smiled faintly. That's motherhood. Her father spoke next. His voice carried the same calm skepticism he had always had. Are you being taken care of? The question wasn't harsh. It wasn't accusing, just careful, practical, the way he had always protected her. Amina hesitated for half a second. Then she glanced toward the doorway. Thabo had stepped quietly into the room. He hadn't interrupted. He simply leaned against the doorframe, watching. Her father noticed him. The two men looked at each other through the small phone screen. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between continents felt strangely small in that silence. Then Amina answered her father. Yes, she said gently. He is. Thabo didn't say anything, but something in his expression softened slightly. Her father nodded once. That was all, but it felt like an understanding. The afternoon settled into the estate's familiar rhythm. Amina spent time in the garden with the baby, while a security guard walked a quiet perimeter nearby. The baby slept peacefully in the stroller while sunlight filtered through the trees above them. Across the driveway, another team of guards changed shifts. Their movements were precise, efficient, routine. A delivery truck arrived at the outer gate. Amina watched from a distance as security inspected the packages carefully before allowing them through. Every box opened, every driver verified, nothing entered the estate without permission. This was life here. Layers of protection, barriers between the family and the world outside. Weeks ago, those routines had felt intimidating, cold. Now they felt structured, predictable, almost normal. The baby stirred slightly in the stroller. Amina leaned down and adjusted the blanket around her. You're getting used to this place, she murmured softly. Just then, a sharp crackle sounded through a guard's radio nearby. The man froze instantly. His hand rose to the earpiece. Amina felt the shift before anyone said a word. Her body recognized it. The old tension returned like a reflex. What is it? The guard asked quietly. A voice answered through the radio. Low, quick. Suspicious vehicle on the outer road. Amina's chest tightened. The guard straightened slightly, eyes scanning the road beyond the gate. But his voice remained calm. Understood. He listened for another moment, then nodded. A second message crackled through. Vehicle cleared. False alarm. The guard exhaled softly. His shoulders relaxed. He glanced toward Amina and gave a reassuring nod. All clear. Amina slowly released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The moment passed, but the reminder lingered. The danger hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved further away. For now. Night fell gently over the estate. Security lights illuminated the gardens outside the windows. Inside the bedroom, everything felt soft and quiet. The baby slept between Amina and Thabo on the bed. Her tiny hand rested lightly against Thabo's arm. Amina lay on her side, watching both of them. The baby's breathing was slow and steady. Thabo's chest rose and fell just as calmly. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Thabo whispered softly, almost to himself, I'm going to make this world better for her. Amina heard him. The words settled quietly in the room. He wasn't making a speech. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply stating a promise. Amina didn't answer. But she believed him now. Not because of what he said, because of everything he had done. She thought about the last few months, the fear, the arguments, the threats from his world, the pressure from both families, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices he had made. Somehow, through all that chaos, something else had grown stronger. Their family. Their love hadn't survived despite the storm. It had survived because they faced it together. The baby shifted slightly in her sleep. Thabo's arm moved automatically, protecting the tiny body beside him even while he slept. Amina watched that small instinctive motion, and something warm settled deep in her chest. Outside the window, security lights glowed along the perimeter walls. Beyond those walls, the world remained uncertain. Enemies still existed. Rivals still watched. Danger still waited, somewhere in the dark. But inside the room, the quiet felt real. Amina reached over and gently adjusted the blanket covering the baby. Then she lay back against the pillow. For the first time in a long while, she allowed her eyes to close without listening for every sound. Beside her, her daughter slept peacefully. Next to them, Thabo slept deeply, and outside the estate walls, guards kept watch beneath the steady glow of security lights. Love, protected by vigilance. For now, it was enough.